Hi, okay, so there's no need for me to do any further introduction of who I am. But today I really wanted to talk to you a little bit about the visibility on the Android fleet and how you can really take your mobile devices or Android devices and incorporate them into your detection pipeline. This has been a pet project for mine and a few other people for the past 2 or 3 years. And I want to do a little bit talk about it. First of all, mobility, which is quite a bit of buzzword in the industry, referring to more and more companies that really want to embrace or use more mobile devices into their workforce for their employees to increase productivity and so on. Typically, when you start talking about mobility and mobile devices, companies tend to have their coping strategy as either embracing it, outright rejecting it by policy or something like that, or ignoring it, just digging their hands in the sand. The latter two approaches is not something that I would recommend. Companies that used to do that tend to have employees find creative ways of circumventing that and still using their mobile devices, creating more risks than if they would just embrace it. So I want to now, for this talk here, I want to focus a little bit more on the companies that actually do embrace mobility and are trying to incorporate that more into their structure. You can see it may come as a shock to you, but mobile devices differs a lot from traditional desktop OSs. You can't just, at least from the security perspective, you can't just stick all your endpoint agents on it and expect magic to happen. It doesn't work that way. So people that are coming into security or securing their mobile platforms, they tend to either ignore it, hoping for the best, and hope is really not a strategy. Or they try to, tweak some policy knobs, harden the devices a little bit, and call it a day. Or they really actively try to fight against it. They try to fight mobility and prevent companies to embrace it, and prevent these devices from getting access to your data. And some of these concerns come from the platform itself, with more stricter sandboxes, process isolation, and battery concern and all that stuff, makes visibility and gaining visibility into these devices harder and more difficult for enterprises. And I said that really ends up with companies really struggling often of how do you build up monitoring? How do you build up detection capabilities on this platform that is so limiting in terms of that? And this really also depends on your own company's mobile strategy. Are you fully bring your own device, where you allow every conceivable device an employee may or may not bring into the company? Do you have a list of certain pre-approved devices? Or does the company provide you with just one type? And that really helps you narrow it down a little bit. But one of the key things that I've seen in successful companies that successfully embrace these mobile platforms, is that if you bring your security team really early into these discussions, it really helps. And that's really the key, to bring the security team in from the get-go to help come in with requirements. Because you need to think, there's a lot of things that you could consider when you start doing more mobility, both from the productivity standpoint, what kind of apps are you going to use, what kind of access are you allowing to your data, and so on. But from the security perspective, you also have to think about, how do you harden the device? How do you manage it? How do you provision it correctly? What kind of EMM solutions are you going to be, or enterprise mobility solutions are you going to be using? And do you need to develop your own? Do you need to have your own development, or can you just buy everything off the shelf? And often you do need to have some development, whether that's on the device itself or on the back end, to integrate into your security systems or integrate into your whatever detection pipeline that you already have. And that's really the key, because you really want to connect your mobile devices to your already existing detection strategy. And you have to make sure that all the data that you can get off these devices actually goes into your already existing system, whether that's a SIEM or whatever other solutions that you have. And that can be difficult, right? And for that, you need to normalize the data in a way where you are running one-off searches for indicators of compromise, that you're also including your mobile devices into those searches, and not just looking at your desktop platforms. So the key here is that mobility has to be part of your overall detection and response strategy. I'm not going to go through all of these points here, but before you start being able to build detection, you have to obviously harden the device. And modern Android devices have a lot of hardening built into that you can both enable and tweak and so on. Some of the highlights: at least make sure that attestation and safety net or verify apps is enabled. You can use some of the trusted execution environment or TEE on the devices. Obviously, have the device encrypted. There are also a lot of strict isolation or sandboxing. We're using SE Linux and Seccomp jails. And that's something that is enabled by default, but we have to monitor and make sure that those jails actually still apply. Like these protections are actually still active. And lastly, I want to mention a little bit, I'll go into a little bit more details into that, pinning all installations to only Play Store. But the question is also, when you're building up your detection, is where are you actually looking? What are you actually focusing on the device? I don't know how well you actually see this image. Probably okay. But at the bottom, so like this is how the Android OS is structured a little bit. And at the bottom, you can see that there's the kernel level. Above that comes the hardware abstraction layer. Then you get the native libraries and runtime, the Java framework, and above that, you get the system apps and the user installed applications. From the Java API framework and all the way down, that's all trusted code that cannot be modified by anyone except the OEM and the manufacturer. And that's something that really is something that you have to think about when you're building up your detection strategy, is how well do you trust your OEM and manufacturer? And this is something that you have to think about also when you're bringing your own device policies. Do you allow every manufacturer or every OEM, and do you actually trust them? So if you put that aside, let's assume for now that we selected trusted OEMs, and then we think about what's then that can be modified. If the device is rooted, basically all bets are off, and system apps and everything else can be modified. So root detection is very, very essential for all your security measures here. So if you assume again the device is not rooted, or if you really carefully monitor for rooted devices getting rooted, the only way an untrusted code gets introduced in the system is typically at the user installed applications. So most of our focus that we have right now is focusing on that level and that perspective, besides looking at state information on the device. So I mentioned a little bit before that you have to pin your applications to the Play Store only. So this is a very old graph. The latest public information I could find is taken from the Android security report that came out in March last year. A new one should be coming out shortly. But it shows you a little bit about how the entire Android ecosystem works. So if you look at the entire Android ecosystem, if you look at malware in general, the Android security team monitors malware on almost all the ecosystem. And you can see like the percentage of devices that have known infections on it or known malware on them. And you look at the devices and you categorize them whether they allow untrusted sources to be installed or they're only pinned to the Play Store. You will see a significant lower barrier of devices that have infections that are only pinned to the Play Store. It's not a perfect solution. It doesn't prevent all malware, but at least it significantly reduces the risk. And that's why it's something that we highly recommend doing. It is harder if you are running a dev shop where you're developing Android apps, because you have to sideload apps constantly to test them and try them out. But for most companies, this is something that we highly, highly recommend. So if you go back into detection, the goal of detection response, most of these features that we've added into the Android ecosystem to make it more accessible are only enabled if you have your device in device owner mode. So it doesn't work in what we call profile owner, or device administrator, you have to be in device owner mode. And the only way you can get into device owner mode is if you set it up, you provision it from the get-go, or if you factory reset your device. So it is a very disruptive function if you don't do it from the beginning. The other way is that we assume here the device is fully managed, and that we have an EMM that actually is using all these new platform features. You can also see here from the notification bar, there is always this banner, if your device is in device owner mode now, that will let you know that this device is managed by your company, and they can monitor your network traffic. And there's no way to swipe this down. This is always there, so you'll always know if your device is in device owner mode, and you can click it, and then you'll get a little bit more information about it. So what do you really need to detect a compromise? Right? Especially on mobile devices. There isn't really, in any way, that kind of magic per se. Many of the same principles here apply for the mobile devices as in any other platform. Right? You need some sort of state information about the device, and you need activity information to base it on. And the key here is really visibility. Right? The only way you can detect compromise is if you actually know what's happening on the device. You know what the device is doing, you know what's happening on it, and that's the same applies to everywhere. So visibility is really the key. And visibility is really what has been lacking so far on mobile platforms. Mainly, of course, due to battery reasons and privacy reasons too. But now, what can we get from Android devices? So from state information, we can get, obviously, as we've always been able to get, lists of all the applications that are installed on the phone. Right? The name, the hash values, when they're installed, are they installed from unknown sources or from Play Store, and so on. And you can then cross-correlate that with your threat information and other information. But you can also get, is the device rooted, have rooting tests, what's the patch level of it, is the bootloader corrupted, what the MAC address of the device is, so that you can correlate that to network traffic. But on the activity information, that's where most of the new stuff comes in, which is available in DO mode. Now you can get process logs. Every time you run an application, you can get timestamp and hash value of that process that's being run. You also get network logs. So you get all DNS logs, TCP connection logs, and ADB logs. So every command that's run over ADB, so for instance, if you try to sideload, you will have to run it through ADB. And that gets logged too. And there's also a lot of other information on the device that's not just due to battery reasons and privacy and other reasons that you cannot really take off the device. For instance, the logcat buffer, and what services are installed, what broadcasts are being sent over, and all sorts of other information that you can collect through bug reports. And now we have a feature of remotely requesting these bug reports and triggering that automatically, so that we can gather this information if we need to. Another part of to detect compromises is really utilize your already existing detection threat information or whatever information you have. You might be subscribing to threat intel feeds. You might have your own threat teams. You might have whatever other methods you have, or you get this local CERT team contacting you. You need to have a way of running checks for indicators across your fleet, and that includes your mobile fleet. And that's what a lot of the network logs are really doing for you, helping out with that. And you also need to be constantly checking for these indicators of bad things happening. And obviously, you need to have some sort of way of tying all this together. I'm really not going to go over the APIs here that you can see here. These slides will be released, and you'll have a link to these APIs. I just wanted to briefly mention them. So what I'm saying is that there are, it's obviously not a comprehensive list of all the security APIs, but these are some of the new APIs that we've been releasing now that you can start developing against. And I know a lot of the EMMs that are out here now, I don't think they have incorporated most of these, at least not the ones that I've seen. So you can have now, you can make sure that Verify Apps is enabled. You can still check the list of harmful apps. So this is when SafetyNet runs periodically on your phone with updated signatures to check if there's any active potentially harmful apps on your phone. And then you can get a list of these that they've triggered and they have found. The network API to get the network logs. And then finally, the security logs. So typically, Android devices will have two log buffers. It will be the buffer for radio logs, and it will be the loghead buffer, which is the generic buffer that everything logs into. In DO mode now, we added the third buffer, which is called the security logs. And the security logs will contain, the process logs and ADB logs and many other logs. And that can be retrieved using these APIs. So others, this is the remote bug report. How do you request it? So as I said before, it's very important to collect bug. If you want to collect bug report, is to do it almost instantaneously. The thing is that the loghead buffer on Android phone is on an average phone typically lasts about 2 hours. So if you are relying on your detection pipeline to come in and an analyst looking at the signal, making some determination, calling up the user and saying, hey, I want you to collect a bug report from the device, it's already too late. So we really need to have the ability to remotely trigger these and have a way of doing that automatically, preferably. So as soon as the signal triggers, you can automatically get the phone to collect this bug report. When you do that, the phone collects the bug report. Once it's done, it will notify the user and say, hey, a bug report has been collected. Do you want to share that with your administrator? And then if you do, if you say yes, it will automatically be uploaded and you can have access to it. If they say no, and they can reject it, it will just be stored locally in the device. So it won't be lost, but you won't get access to it unless you have physical possession of the phone. You can also see the installed applications and the attestation API, which you can use for inferring things like whether the device is rooted or not. So if you go through, what kind of events you would likely maybe encounter or see when you start, adding more mobile devices into your fleet. We've been running, adding our mobile devices to a lot more trust and more data for over a year now. So we're starting to see a lot of the patterns that we're seeing, a lot of the incidents that are coming in. And they can roughly be divided into two parts, either the enterprise or the user. As in, the enterprise, it is more, what you detect. So you detect some sort of signal of a malicious app getting installed, or you have some sort of alert coming from your IDS system, or from your threat information, or third-party information from your feed. You have some sort of indicator of compromise. You're looking at, you across your fleet, and you're finding some infected or malicious devices. The user complaints are more, the user actually has some suspicion that his phone gets compromised, and there's a whole range or spectrum of how this comes about, from very plausible reports to somewhat fuzzy. People losing control of their phone over a period of time. That might be border control, taking the phone, requesting the password, and then taking it away. Police confiscating your device for an hour. Stranger on the street asking if they can make a phone call, and then running away with your phone, or turning away your back and doing something with your phone. So you want to have, so you're uncertain of the state of the device, so you want to take a look at what happened during that time. People plugging their phone into various USB charges found on the streets. Getting a pop-up of, hey, do you want to allow debugging access to it? And they obviously click yes. So you might have some sort of worry of use jacking or ADB commands being run over the wire. So this is a hypothetical example of an alert that might come in, and some of the ways that you can build context around these alerts. This is obviously a terrible UI, but just made here for demonstration purposes. So you have this app, Need for Speed app that is installed on the phone. This is a common technique in the malware industry where you take an already existing app and you just rewrap it, you add some malicious stuff to it, and then you send it in. This is a paid app that now is free, but it comes with an extra. And then you can see the context. This is installed from unknown sources. These are the particular permissions, and you can even highlight ones that you think are, suspicious. You can send it to an automatic analysis, whatever threat intel feed that you have. You want to send it to reverse engineering tools or sandboxes and whatnot. And then you can have the state information about the device. How's the boot state? Does the device allow untrusted sources? What's the patch level? And so on. And then this is more of the state information. And then you can have all the centrally collected logs of the activity information as well. And that would display to you as a timeline, for instance. And here you can see, as soon as we get the alert, you can see like a timeline of the events that come around. And you can see, this is the process logging. The application got launched, and then it made a DNS request, and then a TCP request, and so on. So you get a little bit more information about what's really happening on the device and what the malware is actually doing. When it comes to, so this is the detection. But when it comes to on the response side, it's really not that different to responding to security incidents on mobile platforms than on traditional ones. I mean, you start doing the same things. You start formulating the questions. What are you trying to answer? What are you trying to gain with this? And then you gather the necessary data to answer these questions. You have the available logs on the device. You can, or you should have requested a remote bug report maybe before, and you're just pulling it. You might even talk to the user, depending on the case, and just asking them, was this intentional? Did you get tricked into it? What happened? And finally, you might even, try to have some process in place where you can get physical possession of the phone to acquire data. However, in modern Android devices, it's almost impossible to get any data of value out of them using any sort of physical acquisition modes that are non-destructive. And especially if you're doing compromise investigation, you don't really get anything of value unless you do like a chip off, but then you break the phone, and the user will not be happy. Or typically not very happy, unless you buy them a new one. But and same with other response operations, when you're doing any sort of response to security incidents, you always have to be looking out, what are the indicators? What can I extract from this that I can then take on and search across my enterprise to see are there other devices infected? Are there other, it might be a cross-platform threat. So you have to look through all your platforms and all your threats to see if there are other devices that are infected. And then if you find, you might have to reevaluate the severity of the incident and take other actions. Once you finally hit the stage where you can do remediation, like you think you detected everything, you responded to everything, there are several options. You can wipe the entire device. You can wipe the account, just the corporate account. You can even do flashing the device if you have those capabilities for you. You can block the device or the account from syncing. That might be an option. Or you can just remove the application from the device. So all these options are really, it depends. It depends on the scenario, it depends on what's happening, and so on. You want to be careful about removing the application and just call it a day, because it depends on whether the application is trying to escape the sandbox. Did it successfully root the phone? What did it do? You have to really know about that. And also, a lot of the malware that we see right now, especially a lot of the malware that we see from like nation-state sponsored actors and stuff like that, are really confined within the sandbox of Android. It doesn't really try to escape. It doesn't really try to root the phone or do anything bad because it wants to stay undetected. So a lot of the times you will see it confining within the application. So you could, in theory, just remove the application and be done with it. But you might want to still take a better closer look at what's been happening. Has it been recording all my meetings? Has it been siphoning off all my corp data? Right? So you want to be careful before you do that kind of removal. And then once you hit post-mortem stage, you might want to do a post-mortem and make sure that you adapt or inform your policies. You might have to fix some detection capabilities. You found this out because user complained about it, but you really should have found it through alerts or your detection systems. So you might want to go and fix those. So as I said before, there are a lot of things that were added now on Android O to provide enterprises with significantly more visibility into their logs than before, which makes detecting and responding to these incidents easier than before. But there's still some areas that we can improve. As I said, the way untrusted code gets introduced to systems through user applications, but a lot of the applications nowadays dynamically load code, both for legitimate and illegitimate reasons. You can just say, you can have an app that's really small and benign, just tells you the weather, but then it can fetch code from the internet and then execute it. So when you go through Google Play, it will go through all the scanning. It looks innocuous. But then once it's on the device, it will then check whether you are the intended victim, and if you are, it will then fetch the malicious code. And so this is strictly not allowed by policy nowadays, but it's still not yet enforced. So we see a lot of this happening right now, and could need some improved visibility there. Also, if the application is actually trying to root the device, trying to escape the sandbox, there are limited logs available for that detection. So, summary. Mobile platforms really differ from, as I said, from the more traditional desktop platforms. There's a lot more isolation and sandboxing, and with that comes less visibility and less options of having visibility, and which makes it harder to collect activity details. And additionally, mobile devices are inherently a lot more private than other platforms. People tend to have their phones on them all the time. They use it much more for their personal stuff than they do with your desktop or corporate machines. So you really have to think about carefully balancing out the privacy versus security balance here, so you're not too invasive. And also you have to think about battery concerns as well. As I said before, Android O has offered many options to improve its visibility, but one of the issues that I've seen is that I have not yet seen any or most of the EMMs actually implementing some of these. So if you want to take an advantage of it, you might have to develop your own. Hopefully they will catch up soon. And again, I want to emphasize, if you want to go and do more mobility or mobile solutions, try to get your security team in early. Try to get them in early to have them help you out, help build out these platforms and so on. And that's really the key here. And is that it's also, as with this and everything else, it's very important to give your analysts the proper tooling, right? They have to be, you don't have to give them, you can't give them two UIs. So, if you want to take a look at mobile solutions, you can take a look at, the EMM's console. And then if you look at any other things, you look at your own theme or whatever solution you have. Has to be the same, incorporated into the same solution, and part of your overall strategy. And that's really pretty much it that I have. There are no questions allowed, so I'll be here on the hallway or all day and tomorrow too, if you have any questions. So thank you.